My guest at this time is Adam Andrzejewski. He's the CEO and founder of OpenTheBooks.com. He joins me today to talk about the latest deficit numbers coming from the federal government, which right now, in fiscal year 2019, to this point, are the worst we've ever seen. And Adam, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be on the program, Greg. Thank you very much for your interest in our work. It's a runaway spending train in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it absolutely is. According to the monthly Treasury statement released Friday, the federal government spent a record $3,355,970,000,000 in the first 9 months of fiscal year 2019. Now, we did not get a record amount of revenue, although we certainly got a lot. We got over $2.6 trillion in revenue over the first 9 months. But because of the record spending, our deficit so far in fiscal year 19 is more than $747 billion, and we still got 3 months to go, which means we're going to be roughly around $1 trillion, it looks like. So why can't we get this under control?
Well, Greg, this has been going on a long time. If you go back to the George W. Bush administration, our federal debt was at $5.8 trillion when he left the presidency. When Barack Obama left the presidency, it was up to $19.9 trillion. And right now, we're trending toward $23 trillion. So this is a bipartisan problem. It is certainly continuing to run out of control during the Trump administration.
And we'll talk about the Trump administration in detail in just a moment. But when George W. Bush took office, we were at least projecting budget surpluses. I'm not sure if we ever got there, but we were pretty much breaking even. Then, of course, we had 9/11. We had to build up the military. We had to build up Homeland Security and so forth. And so we got in the hole. But it wasn't just that. How did we get so far out of control during those last 20 years?
Right. So then in 2010, we had, 2008. Through 2010, we had an economic, the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. So right now we're in a period of great economic expansion. We shouldn't be running $1 trillion budget deficits. You run budget deficits during an economic cycle that's, when you slip into recession, you don't want to run them when you're in economic growth expansion.
Neither party seems to care. Ultimately, they'll talk about it, particularly if they're not in power. So the Democrats talked about it to a great extent in 2017 and 2018. Now that they control the House, we don't hear about it quite as much. The Republicans talked about it all the time during those 2 years where it was President Obama and the Democrats controlling the House and Senate. And it ping-pongs back and forth. If you're not the one in power, suddenly you care about the debt. But when people try to fix it and make that a staple of their campaign, like Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan did, they lose. So because they don't want to have the thing that matters to them get cut. So if the politicians don't see it as a way to actually attract votes and the public doesn't actually want their thing to be on the chopping block, how do we ever make progress?
So you make progress because transparency and the war on waste and accountability, these are 90% issues. So the American people feel, 9 out of 10 of us feel that when Washington, D.C. spends $1, there's some form of taxpayer abuse involved. So the politician that aggressively runs to open the books, audit the books, and carve out the waste, he or she's going to be on the side of the American people. So I think it's pretty silly that Republicans are going to run for re-election in 2020 on the issue of socialism and the Democrats draining the Treasury from the left when the Republican-controlled Congress for the first 2 years of the Trump administration, and now, they are still in control of the Senate, when they cut taxes but continued to blow spending out and drain the Treasury from the right.
Yeah, so there's hypocrisy clearly coming on all sides here. And in our previous conversations, you've been happy to see President Trump calling for 5% cuts at the department level across the board. But ultimately, we get stuck in these omnibus spending bills where there's not much regular order in the end, and people just keep piling on their favorite stuff. So we end up spending more. And ultimately, even though he's complained about it, Trump's never vetoed one of these things. So
Right.
What happens?
He hasn't vetoed it. He has put forth a budget this year with those 5% cuts to discretionary spending. And look, Greg, it's a target-rich environment. Here are just a couple examples of what can be cut. Health and Human Services just greenlit $1 million for a mobile app sex diary. $4.5 million in taxpayer funding funded yoga to 11 different groups. NASA greenlit $2.5 million on a grant for a cartoon called Space Racers. Look, the federal agencies like the National Science Foundation, they put $700,000 into a video game to create The Logical Journey of the Zombinis, which is a game for grade school kids featuring blue creatures.
So we moved on from the Smurfs, I guess, but the Smurfs didn't cost any taxpayer dollars last I checked. I could be wrong about that. So you mentioned that lawmakers need to demand transparency, get public about it. I know you're a colleague with former Oklahoma Congressman and Senator Tom Coburn. He put out the Pig Book when he was in office, and other colleagues of his have now picked that up. And he constantly called out waste and abuse. Senator McCain did it for a while. Others have done it over the years. And so people are trying, but what's the key to actually getting progress on this?
Well, here's a nonpartisan reform that everyone can agree on. The 20 largest federal agencies since the year 2003, they admit to $1.4 trillion going out the door in improper payments. Just last year, our auditors at OpenTheBooks.com, we found $1 billion went out the door from these federal agencies to dead people. You've got $6 billion in the last 2 years that went out the door to students from the Department of Education on overpaid Pell Grants and student loans. On health care, you had $85 billion between Medicaid and Medicare just last year overpaid on improper payments. So let's start there. Let's put some accounting controls, some basic accounting controls in the 20 largest federal agencies.
Amazing. So you've been with us many times, Adam. You've talked about the different ways that the government wastes our money. What can the average person do about this?
We have to raise our voice. These things have to become voting issues. You have to, especially during this primary season, ask your member of Congress, what have they done to rein in the runaway spending machine in Washington, D.C.? What have they done to rein in taxpayer waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse?
My last question to you is, it seems like both parties ultimately don't think this is ever going to be a problem, at least not on their watch. How close are we to a point where this does become such a huge debt that those who are holding that debt no longer play ball with us?
So that future's, off into the distance, especially at the federal level. I think when you look at state and local governments, sometimes that future comes home to roost a lot sooner. But at the federal level, you can push this out into the future. And quite frankly, that's what the elites in Washington, D.C. and across the country are counting on. They've, and many times, gamed the system for personal gain. At OpenTheBooks.com, we just put out a report on the charitable hospitals, the largest charitable nonprofit hospitals in the country. 77% of all healthcare expenses in this country are subsidized by the American taxpayer. The average healthcare costs per family are nearly $20,000 nowadays, and the CEOs of these hospitals made up to $21.6 million last year. So many times, because of the sheer amount of taxpayer money in the system's being gamed by the insiders.
And we see that all the time. They like how much they got last time, so they find a way to justify having even more taxpayer dollars sent their way, and it just ends up going a lot of times to excessive salaries, like you mentioned in that blockbuster report that I know got a lot of attention. So, Adam, thank you again for the good work. Thanks for your time today, and hopefully the next time we talk, we'll have slightly better news.
Outstanding, Greg. Thank you.
Adam Andrzejewski, CEO and founder of OpenTheBooks.com. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.